Hello and welcome to the Edufuturists podcast. We're back for another week. This is episode 188. It's good to be back. We had our first episode last week after the summer break, where it was just the three of us talking about. We titled it "Why Education," and that was mainly because when I was coming up with the title, I didn't know what else to call it, but. I think that was the kind of conversation, wasn't it? If you want to go back and have a listen, if you haven't listened to it, we kind of got into the whole idea of the purpose of education, and I don't think we meant to go there, did we? We meant to look at kind of the future of education, but actually got down to the actual essence of it, or we tried to anyway.
Yeah, I think we did everything but actually make the statement of the book. I think we dance around it. We have this nervousness around mentioning the word book and just dance around it. But yeah, it was fun last week.
Yeah,
it was fun. I enjoyed it, talking about the unpicking. And I think if you do listen to it and go back to it, it peaked and troughed, didn't it? And it swung both ways between trying to think about where we want to take it, but also realization, even among us three, that we don't want to change it all, that some bits still exist. Yeah. And we laughed, and I think the lads messaged me after saying, and I said, who wants to know about the Tudors? And the irony actually after the episode of how that related to, well, you kind of need to know that based on what's happening in the UK and everything else. Yeah. And so I think
I went downstairs straight after we recorded, because I think the Queen died while we were recording. I went downstairs and on the screen was the news, and it just said King Charles III, and I thought I'd been transported back into a history class. But actually, maybe we do need to know about the Tudors.
Yeah, I still don't even know anything about them, so we can. That's what we'll maybe get King Charles on at some point, and he can walk us through it. I think maybe a spaniel. I don't know. Let's see.
It's also interesting that we talked about thought we were going to be talking about where we thought the future of education was going to go. But actually,
sorry, I'm sorry, Ben. I'm still laughing because I think that joke was quite good by Steve.
Getting a spaniel on, yeah, I didn't think it was funny. That's why I did and moved on. I don't think
So the first time I've ever told a joke, let's just call this out. Let's put it up there. It's the first time I've ever told a joke, and Dan's actually laughed at it rather than going, "No, it's not funny."
I thought it was a good joke. I thought it deserved more, to be honest.
Okay. I thought loads of people should join the podcast just to laugh at it, but I don't want to sing my own part. But go on, Ben. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no worries. We have got a guest waiting in the background, but never mind. I think we were trying to get into that future of education, weren't we? But actually acknowledging that if we don't acknowledge what's been and what we like about what is, and actually the purpose of it, why does education exist? Why do we have schooling, and what is the real that kind of purpose behind it? And then if we can kind of deconstruct that bit, look at me being I'm usually the one that's stupid, and it would Steve today, deconstructing what we do and why we do it, then it allows us to rebuild in a way that will be sustainable for the world that we're living in. So I think that's absolutely poignant for what we're going to get into tonight.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're really privileged to be joined all the way from Texas. Although I think he's living in New York, but he's joining us from Texas today. Is Garrett Smiley? Garrett is the co-founder and CEO of Sora Schools, which are an online middle and high school. I'm going to bring Garrett in now. Hi, Garrett.
Hello. I want to start off by saying I don't want Texas to be my brand, so everyone, he's correct. Coming from New York. But yes, Sora Schools. It's not about me. Okay.
So do you live in the city, New York City?
Yeah, most of the time when I'm not in the country, you know.
Oh man, that's the dream. That's like if I like it was.
Here we go. There's a Sopranos coming right now.
No, I love New York. It's like, yeah, it's my spiritual home.
It's New London, right?
I'm jealous.
Maybe I don't know.
Definitely New York over London. Everybody at least people say hello to you in New York, like London. No, I think last time I was in New York, somebody called me a Viking because of the beard. I was like, I did have a padded jacket on, so I did look bigger than what I actually am. But I'll take that. In London, nobody even speaks to you. So New York,
definitely.
It's
friendly.
And to all our listeners from London, Steve isn't trying to offend anybody. Thank you for listening to us today, everybody from London. Our listeners from London, we value you, London.
Our listener from London, thank you for joining us again. Garrett, Sora Schools, the online school, a lot of schools went online during COVID. You guys have been doing it since 2019. Why did you why do it? Why? Because I know you guys not long out of college as well, and decided to set this up. Where did the idea come from, and kind of what was the purpose that drove you to found it?
Yeah, the short version of that is it wasn't primarily about being an online school. In 2019, we were recognizing that was a unique opportunity, but really it was about first that a transformative education is possible, right? There's a sequence of events you can in an education you can put a kid through that radically changes their lives and sets them on a much better trajectory, right? I like to start there because so many people, perhaps not your listeners, but so many people become jaded and they lose faith in that fact, right? They think education is a dull instrument and it doesn't actually have much change. But there are so many examples throughout history and, of course, modern day, not only in education settings, which is a rant and a tangent, but of people just radically changing their lives through knowledge. So that's the fact we were starting in. And so we asked ourselves, how many people really have access to this kind of transformative education? And the numbers are quite sad, right? There are great institutions, but they're really for a couple hundred kids a pop, and there are only 100 or so of them, right? That is just not much impact. So the question that we asked ourselves first is, what else do we think is possible in a progressive transformative education? So as we started from the ground up, I'll say first principles, you probably laugh at me, that's out of vogue now. But we wanted to build up, how should a school be if we didn't have to make any concessions to the traditional system? And being in the US, I know the rules in I almost said EU, I'm sorry. The rules in Europe are a little different. But in the US, especially where we were starting, it was a blank canvas. We could turn this into whatever we thought was best for students. And we started with that premise. We built up a completely interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, you might say, curriculum. We're fully competency based. Students have tons of agency and voice. They craft their own curriculum with their advisors. It's like a really fully progressive, novel school. And then we asked ourselves, how do you bring this to as many kids as possible? And that's where the online became particularly exciting, because we saw this trend of these workplaces, Google, whatever, even before the pandemic, they were moving online. These extremely complicated, essential infrastructure for modern society. The employees who create and run that were becoming remote workers. So clearly the office was becoming a high fidelity office to be able to be created online. And so we asked ourselves, is it really necessary for a school to be in person to get all the benefits of this transformation I alluded to before? And the answer we came to was no. We can get almost all the way there in the fidelity of the classroom, but you unlock certain superpowers when you're remote first. The obvious one is the diversity of the student body. You can talk to people from all around the world and build relationships. And since so much of an education, I'm curious to hear your take, but I think so much of an education is about understanding the world and building a worldview. Very few better ways to do that than to talk to members from all around the world. But then, being a computer science person, that's my background, it gets super exciting what you can do with software. When the classroom moves to the cloud, if you will, since I think Steve said that earlier, we moved to the cloud, so much data is leaked off of the experience that we can really guide students, help them in the background without having to hire, a zillion administrators. So anyway, I probably went longer than you wanted, but that's the background.
There's a whole host of things that every one of our brains is going to be fizzing here. You said something, so I think everybody else is going to pick up on something from what you've said. But just hearing what you're saying there in terms of like you went interdisciplinary and you've gone competency based, like this is flying in the face of what most schooling systems around the world do, isn't it? So often it's discrete subjects where you were doing math today. See, I said math then, not maths. You're doing maths in this period, and then you're doing history in this period, you're doing English in this period, and then you might do social studies in this period. And it's almost like there's no crossover. And also there's that idea that rather than being competency based, it's usually like some kind of formal assessment, which doesn't necessarily say that you are competent, it just means that you can remember enough things to pass a certain test, rather than ongoing competencies. And I think that's really stuck out for me from what you've said. And there's a few things that stuck out, but that idea of that really does fly in the face of it. And there must have been there's an intentional reason for that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think I'm heterodox in many ways with the progressive education sphere, but one of the things is I think assessment is actually a good thing insofar as performance reviews are a good thing in the corporate world, right? They can be such a powerful tool to have an honest conversation about here's where I think you are, here's where I think you can go, and here's how I'm going to help you get there, right? So that's how I view assessment. It's just all the toxic elements of this high stakes culture that we've created around assessment of the single test where, not only to mention the pedagogical inefficiency that you alluded to, where you cram and then you never see it again. Anyway, but the core of assessment is, I think, very valuable. Just how we do it at Sora is, like I said, competency-based. So students move on when ready, but they can also try to demonstrate their mastery of, we have two different types of things we assess. We have units, which is content knowledge, and we have abilities, which are, problem solving, teamwork, those sort of things. So students can always choose a different context to demonstrate their mastery over these things. And they show increasing competency, increasing mastery with time. So we're actually trying to track lines, not dots, as the saying goes, right?
So, Garrett, how does that work practically? So is there a certain rubric that goes with a competency that you're looking for? And yeah, is it? 'Cause I'm just thinking we get into the area of being subjective rather than objective, and maybe the aim is to be subjective rather than objective. I'm not sure, but how does it look on the ground, I guess?
Yeah, I'm a fan of subjectivity within constraints. So I'll take a step back and open a can of worms, which is, I think school, especially high school, so we focus on middle and high school. We run our middle school similar to our high school, but I think a big part of it is ensuring kids get a certain breadth and depth of curriculum and content and exposure to the world. However, I think we owe it to them to put it in the context of the real world, one, so their interdisciplinary piece, and two, in a context that's exciting to them. So giving them that voice and choice. So anyway, that's the can of worms. I don't think school should be a place where if a kid doesn't learn to read or write, that's a success, as long as they're happy and passionate. I definitely do not agree.
No, it's good.
That.
I think what you just said in 30 seconds is what we try to say for 60 minutes in the last episode. So yeah, we're with you.
Okay, so we're not gonna we're not gonna throw down over Zoom. Good. So yes, so how it works in function is I still want every student to get the units coverage. So we have 120 units, standards. You can think of them. I don't know what you call them in the UK. In the US, we call them standards. Basically, like standards, 100 Years War. I don't know, those sort of things, right? US Constitution. However, for almost everything, I don't really care the order you learn it in, right? Math, some science, some of the stuff has dependencies, prerequisites as we call them, but 80% of content, if you want to learn about ancient Athens before you learn about the US Revolution, which usually goes the opposite way in the US, I really don't care. As long as I can tie it to your interest, as long as you have an authentic why, as long as it connects to your worldview and your meaning statement, that is so much more important to me than marching kids through a curriculum. However, full circle, I do still care at some point in your 4-year journey that you grapple with this in a context, right? So we're basically, you can imagine check boxes. It's way more complicated than that. We've developed all of our own software, all of our own learning management system, because we just run our school extremely differently. But you can imagine it just as every student has check boxes for each units that grow over time, whatever, but check boxes.
And you talked about project-based learning and moving across disciplines. How is that formed? Where has that come from? Is that just your idea, or is that pulled from phenomenon-based learning in Finland and those kind of approaches? Is a lot of research gone into it? Where did it come about, and how does that apply, and how have you changed it and applied it to Sora, really?
Yeah, a lot of research. I like to tell people that nothing that we're doing, well, most of what we're doing is not occurring for the first time. We're just trying to take all what I call localized innovations from throughout school districts, individual schools, other countries, whatever, and just bring it to one package and make it accessible to students in this progressive 21st century ethos, right? I will say our chief product officer is Finnish, so he will appreciate that call out. Yes, that was his sister's actually a leading researcher in project-based learning, problem-based learning, so she will appreciate that. But really, we're not trying to be dogmatic about anything. Just what works for the students, what has solid proof points, what's catching steam, what do we feel best? It is subjective at the end of the day. It's hard to do comprehensive psychology and behavioral research in this way. But what do we feel is best for students, no matter where it comes from? Let's bring this together within the framework of our real-world interdisciplinary competency-based assessment structure. A lot of that happens to be project-based, because I just think in almost all cases having and I define it very broadly for the record, it doesn't have to be a robot, but having a synthesizing piece of work at the end of an experience. In our experience for only 6 weeks, so having all 6 weeks go into creating something really challenging and individual, I think is super important. But we also have debate style classes. We have a bunch of other stuff too, if it serves the students.
What I really I see the hope in what you're saying is that obviously even though what you're saying is flying in the face of a system, and it absolutely is in terms of that interdisciplinary model. What this is not that far removed in terms of a step, because what we often talk about is we go fully remote. Students do whatever they want to do. This is what a lot of people suggest the future of education. There's this idea that they get a project, they just pick their own thing, and then they run away with it, and then they learn how they want to learn, and the teacher just guides them along that. And there is, to some extent, I understand that model, and I know that like places like a Sora School, it's not exactly like that, but there is that very much sense of that it's very driven by the student. What I'm really interested to drill into here is this: you say that there's 120 units that you, over their 4-year period, you want them to look at. It doesn't matter how they do it, in what order they do it. Like two things from it. One is who determines them 120 units as what value, and then with that, like I consider. So I was a religious studies teacher, so I consider the understanding about worldview, experience about different people's philosophical and religious perspectives being really, really important in helping somebody to form character and their understanding of other people and their own worldview. Yet there'll be some people that will absolutely acknowledge and suggest that anything that's got some kind of religious background or philosophical background might not be relevant. So how does that then navigate? Is where I'm sat, really.
Yeah, I think since the purpose of an education is to help a student live a good life, it requires some sort of consent from the parents to I'll say, I think every school should have some sort of core curriculum, which is a controversial statement for many. I don't really see why. But what that core curriculum should be an agreement between the school and the parents. And so if a family doesn't want their student to engage with hard-hitting philosophy or discussions about other cultures, or like we've had an expedition which we treat very, very, very sensitively, and we do not, whatever. We've had an expedition called "Is There a God?" Right? If you don't want your kid to be having conversations, and we've run it multiple times, sometimes it ends up in very different places. But what we care about is the inquiry. What we care about is the discussion and the debate. If parents aren't comfortable with that, I understand, I guess. But we're just not the school for you. There should be another version of Sora that, washes all the critical thinking out. And you can go to that school, right? So that's why I think choice is an essential thing for the future of education. And there's a second part to your question that I forgot. What was the second part?
I suppose how do you kind of navigate that? Because like some people, because I love that, by the way. That was one of my favorite kind of questions about the philosophical proofs for the existence of God, and I found that difficult when there were people that wouldn't even question that, because it wasn't something you're allowed to question critically and whatever else. What I was saying is, I think how do you determine that, and then how do you kind of make that? And I suppose if it's that agreement thing and consensual thing, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So we actually, I will say, our units and our abilities aren't that different than what you would expect in traditional school. We have some things like our emphasis on philosophy and our social sciences curriculum, and we do things a little differently. But really, I think what the power is that we do them together, right? We do it in interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary way. That's the power of it. And we're doing it in different contexts. So this in the like, is there a God expedition, or in our physics of sharks expedition, or whatever it may be, they're getting the units in the latter example. They would get units on oceanography and physics and biology. They would get all these things that you may see in a normal high school, but it's completely, like, technically it's the same, but the fact they're contextualized in a real inquiry from the students that they care about and that they chose to be a part of, it's a world of difference, right? So I don't think the cultural canon that we try to impose on students through school is really that broken. That's the controversial thing. I don't think those are like bad things for kids to learn. I just think it should go way above and beyond slamming facts in their head. We should work very, 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 very hard to contextualize these in the real world, why this is important, why this matters, why this makes life more important or beautiful or valuable, and how this fits into a worldview, right? Just telling kids that sharks have no bones, like, who cares, right? Let's talk about how the ocean's dying and how they're
Yeah, and I suppose when you apply that methodology to a curriculum, you soon find out which stuff doesn't matter. If you find it really difficult to apply to life, then I guess it kind of shows up some of the things. I know we were talking last week about some of the things we learn, and everyone does it, don't they? Like, when have I ever had to use Pythagoras' theorem again, or when the erosion of rocks, like, when have I had to learn
V-shaped valleys? V-shaped valleys. That's what you're going to say.
And I suppose, so do you come across, like, I suppose, because you're talking there as a big advocate of, I suppose, what we kind of call we call it a national curriculum here in the UK, or a core curriculum, like you say. Do you come across key learning that's taught in the traditional system that you think, actually, this is just not relevant for what we're doing? Students aren't going to be able to apply this, and are you quite ruthless with what you cut out?
Absolutely. I will say it's more bare bones, our curriculum. We do not have standards that reach into here's exactly how students need to demonstrate Pythagorean theorem. And it's just not that important. If the student understands why it matters, and we give them an ambitious project, they're likely going to figure out how to use it effectively, even if they don't understand the exact theorem, right? So it is more bare bones than most, like, math educators or science, whatever. But I will say it goes far beyond what they think is even possible in the traditional scope of a school, because every kid is there. This is something I didn't touch on too much in the introduction, but I'll take some time to do now. Every student is in a learning experience that they chose at Sora. And that sounds simple, but I think it's a total paradigm shift. So we show the students every 6 weeks, here's all the different experiences you have the ability to register for. And we have software in our learning management system that makes sure they're registering for enough new units and abilities to graduate on time to hit their goals. But for them, just imagine a progress bar. It's basically what it is. And, oh, this gets me 20% to my cycle pace. Oh, this one helps me 30% closer to my cycle pace. But they have 50 they're choosing from, right? And so we ask them, every student in Sora has an advisor who helps them through registration and much more. It's a 1 to 15 ratio. So they know these students very well. Like, why does that matter to you? Physics of sharks. That's super cool. Why, right? How does this fit into your worldview? Why do you think this is important? And the fact every kid has opted in, this is like what people, when they talk about some radical, like Sudbury School, they say the power is that every kid's learning what they want to. Sure, very similar in Sora, and we're still making sure kids get 80% of what you would expect in a high school education, right?
Yeah. If you've got students all picking their own kind of expeditions and doing their own thing, is there much chance for collaboration there, for working together, for teamwork? And how do you build that in?
Yeah, totally. So as Sora grows, it's becoming a lot more common that students will take the exact niche together. Right now we have an offering of expeditions every cycle, which is a few dozen that they can register for. That'll have at least 3 or 4 students in it, up to 15. So small class sizes. It's kind of like a college, like liberal arts little college vibe. So those are expeditions. We also have our abilities, our independent study, and our theses. So like students can customize the experience greatly, and some choose to do that. Right? They want to feel like a PhD student, where they're constantly proposing independent study and they're working with advisors, and that's an awesome route. Some of our students value the collaboration. They want to be in expeditions. They want to like register for a bunch of debate style. However, we have abilities, which are the so they're units and abilities. Remember, we have abilities that are teamwork. We have abilities that are collaboration. So you have to show your competency over these things. You can't just be a hermit student who never, who never demonstrates their collaboration, but you can have a preference. In fact, I want students to develop a preference. That means they're developing their self-knowledge, right?
Yeah. I really like that way where you were, it feels that this is I want to say a possible, because it's not possible because it's actually happening. It feels like a more realistic way of bridging that gap between how it's always been and then this fully personalized route. There's almost like it's a bridge between, and by creating that personalized route. But it's interesting, coming back to something you said that I think tied together. You said that the idea that we don't want to just cram kids' heads full of facts, because that's just pointless in and of itself unless it's applicable and it's not relevant to context. Because you talk about people their worldview statements. I've heard you say that a little bit in terms of like what they're trying to do as a mission. How does that form? Because I presume that is really important. That if a student's got an idea of their why and what they're trying to achieve, that'll help develop the advisors and the curriculum around that.
Yeah. So I think I'll speak to the last point first. I think worldview is best developed not by specifically talking about it, but by engaging with sticky problems in the world. So our advisors are trained to engage students with the why questions. Why did you choose this one versus that one? And I think when we're comparing choices, that's when values become particularly obvious. And they meet with the students one-on-one every 2 weeks. So there's plenty of time over their 4 years to get to know each other and have these conversations. But you said compare and contrast. What was the first part of the question? I'm under caffeinated today.
Yeah, it was this idea about you were saying about not filling students' heads with facts, but you were trying to then like navigate that into a broader worldview statement and how we do that.
Yeah. So what I think is funny about traditional school as well is I think it's even bad to its own ends, right? It says we want to fill kids' heads with a bunch of knowledge, but it's not even good at that. You look at the long-term retention of students and these facts, it's abysmal. And it's because it's born out of a fundamentalist misunderstanding of how the human mind works, right? The human mind is a relevance-finding machine. It's how it works. Like, this is not controversial. We see something and that triggers a related idea because neurons that fire together wire together, right? I'm looking at the pens on my desk and that reminds me of the things that it can do and how it's made. And right, we fire connecting ideas. So when students have disparate facts and fragments, like shark has no bones, it has cartilage. Okay, what am I going to do with that? And when will that ever be downstream of another relevant idea? That's the most important part, right? You need to connect the knowledge, ground it in the real world so that it's going to come up in relevant contexts, right? So, and not only to mention this cram style of learning in traditional school, which I did all through my education, all through college, because it's what was rewarded, right? It's so ineffective where we already know how to make people remember things longer. And we implement these at Sora as well. Spaced repetition. Your mind looks for things that have been useful repeatedly. So if you learn something once, it's not going to stick. It's rare that it sticks unless it has, great emotions or your cortisol levels spiked afterwards, right? It's like rare occurrences where it does stick long, but it's much more effective to learn something in, we've known this since 1890, right? To learn things over time and to be reminded of the same ideas on a certain cadence. That tells your mind This is important. So what I'm trying to say is that it's like the Peter Gray quote. The schools we see today are more of a remnant of history than they are of science. Right? No real science went in this. This is a social engineering tool. And now we've seen this story play out long enough to know it's not really even good at anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're aware of Siddhartha Mitra and his
School in the
work.
Cloud.
Yes. Siddhartha is a great friend of the podcast and has been on recently, and his whole history of the British education system and how it was kind of exported around the empire, and I suppose his whole thing is, it's actually the school system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it should do. It's just what it does is not relevant anymore. And I think yeah, it's interesting. I like that whole concept. I think I heard Elon Musk say that on a podcast I listened to recently about how if you want to remember something, you got to attach meaning to it. You got to attach purpose to it, and the fact that the human brain isn't supposed to just continuously be thinking hard about things continually all day, every day, in the way that the school system does with our students. It's designed to find efficient ways to cut corners and to find, so they can have downtime, it can have peaks and troughs and how it works. And it's, yeah, I do wonder what damage we're doing to maybe not damage, just like best years of your life, isn't it? From being like, I've got my daughter's just turned 3. She's going to go to school next year, and they're going to be the best years of our life in terms of what she's doing. And you just don't want to get to your 20s, I suppose, like a lot of us did, and think, well, actually, what do I remember from that time from school, where I spent the place where I spent most of my time? Was it efficient, and how it prepared me for the world? Absolutely not. I think everything, especially for myself, everything that's kind of got me somewhere since I left school has been learned since school. And I think I really took like a bit of a doomed turn in the conversation, but I suppose it's quite relevant to, and we've all got, the three of us have got, Ben's got girls in school, Steve's got young kids who will be going to school soon, and I suppose it's so relevant, isn't it? Because we're people who live in society, and we're about to put our children into a system, or we've got our children in a system, and you just you want the best, and you want it, and I suppose in the position we're in as well, that we hear, because I think what we're talking about now, if you go to people, normal average teacher, especially in the UK, it's very, very fringe, very, very, very fringe, and almost not even worth much thought, because it's just too strange, it's too out there, it doesn't fit in, it's unrealistic to most people according to them. So I guess, do you see Sora as being, and schools like it, I suppose, that we mentioned synthesis earlier, as being fringe on the edges of the traditional system? Or do you think over time the system will start to break down, I guess, and we'll start to see the fringe options become the main menu for people?
I don't think the system's going to break down. Like, the system is pretty robust. Bureaucracies are created to be robust, and especially in the US, I can't speak too much to your education system, but a recession's good for the school system. It has more access to talent. It's designed to exist through these things. What will make it break down? So it's not going to break down because of macroeconomic factors, what I'm saying. It's going to break down because parents demand something different, and it's not going to be able to adapt. Again, it's a bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are designed to not change. It's like in the definition, right? So if parents demand something better, it's not going to be able to accommodate those demands. And there will be things like Sora that pop up. I don't know if you've been following US politics too much. And in fact, this is intentionally pushed down, but Arizona's passed a law which is going through a process of being contested right now, but to give every student $7,000 a year to pay for education resources or private schools or whatever. because it's what the people are demanding, right? And the governor listened. So if that happens, you're going to see Cambrian explosion of education options, and that future gets me very, very excited. But to circle back to the first point you made, I don't think damage is off, right? I don't think I wouldn't say the system doesn't damage kids, because it certainly does damage many. But I think the more relevant word is opportunity cost. It got good at doing one thing, which is making kids literate. Like that was the main thing, and understand basic math principles. And the things that you learn through like K5, it reinforces pretty well. And most of the society understands these things. But the education system was crystallized in a phase. You think that, I think it's a common misconception historically. The education system was crystallized in a phase where there was a lot of debate on how schools should work. It was a period of like, people assume that this was the model that was working, and so everyone got excited about scaling it. No, people got excited about scaling education as a right that people have, and people's opinions on how we should do so were wildly different. So we didn't even have alignment. We scaled something before. It's like the startup framework. We did not have an MVP. Like, people were debating how it should work, and we scaled that thing before the debates were resolved. So it got good at a couple of things. Then we formed a bureaucracy around it, and then we scaled it across the empire, like you said, all while we just gave up on the debates that it was born out of, right? So I think today it's not that it's, I think the more accurate phrase is that the design criteria that it was reacting to are no longer relevant, nor are they exhaustive. Whereas before, teaching someone to read and write was like 90% of the battle. But now we keep adding layers to it of high school and this 21st century and this information entrepreneur economy, this service economy. Those design criteria were so far from what they were when it was turned into a bureaucracy and scaled, right? Anyway, I just wanted to comment on that point.
No, it's really valid. I'm going to take it a little bit different, and I'm interested because you're middle and high school first, in terms of how students respond, and is there a preparation phase? Is there a transition phase into this new way of learning, or actually are you, because they'll be in the old system technically, unless all of your children come from Montessori or something that's a little bit of a different approach. Maybe those kids will get it a little bit different, but from that side of it. So that's first thing, and then maybe the same around development of your practitioners, because I'm conscious I don't want to call them teachers, because you've got advisors and loads of different things. What does that look like? What does it look behind the scenes? How are the students attached to a particular advisor or group of people advising them through it, and how are they developed to this new method of I don't want to say delivery, but supporting and coaching through the development of learning and the focus?
I'll start by saying something that all school administrators or all people who've existed in the system know. It is unbelievably complicated, right? So we raised a good bit of money a while ago, but we told everyone we're not going to scale this yet. This is we're not going to do, should I call it name? We're not going to do the alt school thing where we scale the thing and then you realize there's some fundamental things we didn't reckon with, or we didn't pay enough respect to, and now we have all these locations and blah, blah, blah. So we spent 4 years really getting it right, at least we think. And next month, sneak peek, next month we're going to go try to tell the world about it, like for the first time. Rebrand and marketing and all this stuff. So, but it's just really complicated to get this right, because to your point, you have to bring in faculty. We call them faculty because there's the advisors, there's mentors, there's everyone. Lots of different functions. They all need to be properly trained. So therefore we had to create a comprehensive teacher training program. We had to create, I mentioned this before, or I at least glanced over it. We created mechanisms for teachers to have unbelievable levels of professional development. For example, we tell the faculty here, it's like a Fitbit for your synchronous sessions as well as how your students are doing. This is how much you spoke. This is how much. These are the questions that you asked that prompted the biggest response. How can we build these into the next iterations of your expedition? We say, here's the gender breakdown of your talk time, your class. So we're giving faculty all of this input and really making sure they're delivering the Sora promise the way we want and the way they want, right? It's not just us big brothering them, it's working with them to be as good as possible. That's a huge moment that hasn't really existed in schools before, but that's just one piece, right? We have to do this for our advisors. So our advisors all have dashboards that they get sent to say, this student, didn't really talk in their first session. You should message them to see what's going on. Is it a slow Monday, or your student didn't turn in 2 pre-work assignments this week, so they weren't really ready for their discussion. You should ping them, see what's going on, right? Making sure no students fall through the cracks. That alone is a huge project, right? That took us a while to pull off. And then to your point, deschooling, we could say, or just getting students onboarded into the school is also an unbelievably large project that we're still working on. So how do we make sure every student, because we live through multi-age interdisciplinary learning environments, so many challenges. And if you haven't been a part of that community before, it'll feel really weird until you're used to it, right? It'll feel really weird. So kids and parents come in and sometimes they freak out, right? What the heck is this? This isn't school. It's like, I told you that. But so just making sure we're extremely clear about our messaging and kids are given the tools to succeed. It is not novel. It is certainly not novel, but now I think we're in a very healthy place. I can dive into the specifics of that if you would like, but yeah, complicated.
I am absolutely fascinated by that concept of you giving data to the advisors or the guides or whatever else in different elements, and the practicalities of that. So I'm guessing that it must be high level function recording, and what that looks like, because I think now, back to my teaching in a secondary school in the UK, if somebody could tell me that there's a group of people that speak for a very small amount of time every lesson, and I need to dig something out of them, and really I should know that, but I don't always know that. And when I'm trying to, and if a student's really giving me a lot, I want to try and encourage that, because it almost helps me as a teacher. But then there's also the worry of those that aren't listening or aren't involved or aren't engaged or aren't bringing that level of data is invaluable to ensure that everybody makes a difference. So what practically, I'm intrigued. I don't know if the others are, but I'm intrigued by how that kind of works.
Works a lot of different ways. We have a lot of different mechanisms to help we view it from the perspective of helping our faculty be better faculty, right? So we're not trying, as I said before, we're not trying to big brother them. We're not trying to say, oh, this metric was too low. If it's low for another week, you're fired, right? That is not the vibe we're trying to go for. It's instead, here are the ways, here's what the data is telling me. Here are the ways that I think you can engage your students even more. Or we're seeing a trend, it's hard to talk about, but faculty member, I'm seeing that the students who identify as girls in your expedition sessions are talking 50% less than the boys, right? Like it's something that needs to be talked about. And unless you have the data, it's so easy for a bunch of reasons for us just to glaze over that. And there's, I don't know how detailed I should go, because it probably gets boring quickly. I think it's super exciting, but things like we see a variance. We see this student is engaging 50% less this week than they did last week. Maybe something happened. Like, let's make sure that we reach out and the student feels cared for. So it's just the beast you have to build behind a really well-run school is a lot. And being an online program gives us the particular ability to do this, which excites me. But I will say, why are we a full school? That question hadn't really come up, but people do ask me that all the time. Why don't we just sell into schools, or like, isn't there larger change there? Everything that I talked about isn't that hard technically, right? It requires a lot of intentionality, and you have to design it right. There are a lot of unintended consequences, but if you throw a well-run product organization at that, they would have been able to build that in public schools in like 6 months, right? The system never would have let it happen. The true bottleneck on learning, on students' experience, is the system itself. So I could sell EdTech. People ask me, why don't I sell this software, our full LMS, into traditional schools? Because they'd never use it. And if they did, they wouldn't do it right? This all stuff is an inconvenience to them. We have to fully control the experience from the curriculum we develop all our own curriculum, to the software, to the teacher training, to everything has to be in this vision of the future that we have, right? Can't piecemeal it.
Yeah. You reminded me that is, I don't know if you know much about the business school in Madrid. They've got something called they call it the Wow Wall, and they've built some AI technology that sits behind their video conferences and reads facial expressions. So they get data at the end that says,
"Oh, I haven't done that yet. That's cool though."
So it tells them like when, based on facial expressions, when students their interest peaked when they. But I think what you're doing seems to be a lot more comprehensive in that data, and sounds phenomenal, to be honest.
We try not to do anything that sounds dystopian, so it's a balance. We can do stuff like that, but it's always a discussion with our families. Like, is this weird? Yeah, it's a little weird. Okay, we'll think a little more about that. We'll push.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I had this conversation with someone recently about how, because I don't know what traditional schools in the UK are very, very, and I think they've taken their influence from the chartered schools in America, where it's all very, you must be looking at the front all the time. You must be like, your attention can't go anywhere else. But actually, I think sometimes it's a good thing just to stare out the window for 5 minutes and let your brain, like what I was saying before, I guess, let your brain have a bit of downtime and then jump back in. If you had some AI software reading your facial expressions all the time, it's probably not going to be the best indicator.
Don't even get me started on that. We've completely blown up the school schedule, how it traditionally is. Ours looks much more like a college. So our students can register for the expeditions and for the session. We have a lot of different mechanisms for learning, but they can schedule these things how they want their calendar to look. So some of our students have mornings slammed with synchronous sessions, then they take a nap, and then they have their afternoons for their async work. I think that's awesome. Some of our students want an hour break between each expedition session. That's also great, right? So I feel this way about remote work too. We've been remote work for 4 years. I want our employees to have enough freedom and also enough mindfulness about their own state. If you're tired, take a nap. You're not helping anyone, right? Of course, there are cases where if I was tired right now, I could not take a nap. But if, we want people to have that agency over their own mind and manage their energy in that way.
And it ties into, we listened to a webinar that you were involved with about the future school, with a guest that's coming on in a few weeks' time, Anna Fabrega, and you talked about one phrase that you used that really stood out for me, and it ties into what you're saying there. Really, is that that acceptance of failure, and that failure is a really great learning point. And you use that phrase about things being a data point, and failure being a data, and I really like that as a concept, because I think I think I mentioned this on the podcast last week, gents, and if I didn't, then I should have done. Is that my daughter started high school in the UK, well, secondary school in the UK last week, and we had a conversation about what she was hoping to get out of this year and this and that, the other, and her phrase was, "I just don't want to fail, Dad." And I was like, "Oh man, that's not what you want." First of all, you don't want your kid to say that, and second of all, you want failure is good. If failure is good if you learn from it, because it's not that's the point, isn't it? So how does from what you've just said, really, about this idea of there will be times when people just need to take a break when they're not at the best, or they might need a nap, how do you kind of navigate and bring failure into what you do as an organization? Because I think it is key, isn't it?
Yeah, I think from some perspective, we're failing all of the time, right? Insofar as there's a way that we could have done it better. And so that's the mindset we want our students to have. We have formative feedback and all their we call them tasks, their pre-work. We're just trying to create that muscle of what could we have done better. As long as that's the case, I don't really care, even if you got, because we do have numerical scoring systems. I don't care if you got a 1 out of 4 on this assignment. I will allow you to redo it every time. There's nothing at Sora that you can't redo. That's like a big pillar of our design. So we use resubmitting as a good metric for how failure forward, how much of a growth mindset our students are developing. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is one of the biggest failures of traditional school, Because if we create a bunch of people who are afraid of failing, they're not going to do anything. Everything of value, whether it's a chef creating their menu, right? I'm sure they went through 100 iterations of that dish before it landed on the menu, or if it's an engineer creating the Mars rover drivetrain, they failed a ton, but they didn't view it as failure. They just viewed it on the path to figuring out what works. And they could have continued the path to making it better. Like, we can infinitely approach perfection, right? We can't ever get there, but we can infinitely approach it. So we want our kids to view it as that spectrum, as that continuum.
Just what you were saying, I was just thinking in regards to failure but things about the successes and those kids that accelerate and get on and really thrive in this environment and do really, really well. And I know that there's units, and then I know there's abilities, I think you said, that, and the competency bit, but where does it sit when a student comes in and drives and wants to work at their own pace and move quickly? And I know you talked about 4 years. What happens if somebody comes in, or a collective, and says, I want to do it in 2? What happens then?
Yeah, we usually tell them to try to go above and beyond in terms of their electives, and we have full dual enrollment. So if you want to start college early or whatever, we ask our students usually to try to go above and beyond. We've had multiple students graduate early, so it is a thing. At Sora, we have this concept called PACE, and PACE just means you have this big goal. Let's say it's 100 units of that's confusing my language. Let's say it's 100 things that you have to complete to get your goal, just to really simplify it. If you're here for 2 years, you just got to go twice as fast. You have to have twice as much velocity pace as your peer, but it's totally doable, right? We've had students do it. It's the same. It's very similar. Sora's setup is very similar to university. If you want to graduate in 2 years, that just means you're going to have to go faster, right? It's not impossible, but I think the extra special thing about Sora is if you mess it up, you just do it again. Or if you mess up an assignment, you just do it again, right? So we're trying to lower the barrier constantly for students to challenge themselves. Because I know when I went to school, we had students playing the GPA game, and they did not take the hardest classes because they were trying to max out their GPA, right? I cannot imagine a more toxic mindset, right?
Garrett, I'm interested to know, after Sora, so students want to go to college, university. Do they leave Sora with what they need in terms of their credentials in order to get into university? And I suppose as a follow on from that, if you do go global, because I know you just operating within kind of the US time scale at the moment, but if you do go global, like for example the English system, when a student will need, in most cases, A levels, they'll need like 3, maybe 4 A levels to get into a good university. How do you prepare them for that, I guess? And yeah, so
we do it country by country. In the US, we have made it a particular point that our students will all come out with a GPA and with the traditional classes you would expect in another school. So our students do come out with an A, B, or C in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Pre-Calc, right? Speaking of math, and they come out in world history, American. They come out with all of the things you would expect. It was just all mashed together and chosen by the students in this interdisciplinary environment, right? But as I opened the show talking about, assessment is not a bad thing if it is an opportunity to have an honest discussion with each other. So our goal, it's not actually a goal, this exists today. Our goal for our students to feel this way, I suppose you could say, is I can get any GPA I want as long as I work hard enough. That is the mindset I want, because it is true. Everything the students do, they can resubmit, they can try again. If it doesn't even work, or they can just wipe it and try it in a different context. So if you got a 1 out of 4 on that oceanography unit through your Physics of Sharks expedition, consider it gone. If you do a independent study project about this thing you're really excited about that also addresses the unit comprehensively, I will fully overwrite that past quote. I don't even like saying failure, but that last failure, right? Because it's just a stepping stone. Now you know more. Now you know You want to do it differently, sure, as long as you show mastery over it. So students come out with the transcript you'd expect. We've had students accepted to extremely competitive US universities already since we just finished our 4th year. So that happened last year, like Georgia Tech, Rhode Island School of Design, like these really competitive schools. So it works, but convincing parents take a leap of faith into a completely different model is the challenge for this year.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I think if you this is that whole chestnut that everybody has as a teacher, that every parent has been through school, so somehow they know how school should be, and so I'll tell you how it should be. We laugh and joke about this, and how you should teach or whatever else, and I think that challenge will definitely be there, won't it, in terms of that convincing. But I do really like that idea. Most of us who went to university will acknowledge that. In fact, all of us who went to university will acknowledge that we did in 3 years what could have definitely been done in a year if we'd have just been intent rather than the things that went around the university experience. But I think that idea of working at a pace and then giving people an opportunity to go faster, or I'm guessing on the flip side, there's the opportunity that if some people take longer to get where they're getting to, that's also okay. And I know that talk about that, what that means, because I'm guessing that if some people aren't working at the pace that they should be or need to be for that, is there an opportunity from the other side or the support that way?
Yeah, we have students currently on pace to finish Sora in 5 years. It's something that they wanted, their parents wanted. Perhaps they were in a less than rigorous program beforehand. We have some catching up to do. It's totally okay. Again, this is an art and a science. So the art side of it is I just want to make sure the students aren't settling. Right? They're not thinking I'm too stupid to do it, and all these toxic thoughts, and they're pushing off their goals. As long as that's not the case, and we have a plan and the students engaged in it, 5 years is totally fine. Culturally, 4 years is the norm. So 90 probably percent of our students do it in the 4 years, and they just kind of increase the scope of how much they bite off in those 4 years. But Sora is designed to be flexible because every student's different. Every student's goals are different. Every student's capabilities coming in are different.
I'm focused. The pace is great. The end point in terms of GPA or the qualification that you hold or the piece of paper is great. But one of the things that really interested me when we had a conversation many moons ago with Agora, one of the schools in Holland, was
I'm familiar, yeah.
Their engagement with businesses around these projects. And you talked about real life experiences and how to apply it to a context. And that's great as an advisor, somebody who's able to bring it to life a little bit. Some people will say, well, the best teachers do that anyway. What engagement commercially, not from a money point of view, do you have with businesses? Is that an aspiration where you're working with loads of different things where somebody, and I always go to the story from Agora, the kid who wanted to design skateboards and went through that way and then ended up working and designing skateboards. And then I think one of the children at the age of 14 was working on a Hillary Clinton campaign or something ridiculous. And is that an aspiration? Is that already there? Or is there an aspiration to develop that more in regards to real world experiential learning, applying it to the context, not just this is what it would mean, this is actually what it does?
We have a mentor network where our students are plugged in with people in the industry for whatever professional aspiration they have, and they have conversations. It's not a huge aspect of our program, and I'm very excited about working on this more. One of our very first student, funny it worked out that way, he told us when he joined, I just want to be a game developer. Like, this is my goal that I have for myself. I will do the whole school thing and whatever, but I just want you to know I'm optimizing for this outcome. And we said, okay, we'll try to get you there. Your advisor will partner with you. And right out of high school, he got a job at EA, right? Electronic Arts. It's like one of the best. So it does happen. There's an infinite list of ways that we can better do this, and including one really big one we have working right now, in the works right now, I should say. But yeah, that's a big opportunity. How do you connect with students' communities? Because that is such an authentic why. It's so obvious. It's right in front of their eyes, right? If we're getting very real, that requires parents to do that with their student in many cases. And we're not always seeing that level of buy-in with all of the families, because it's a huge ask. Please drive your kid around 3 times a week too, right? So they're kind of barred off from that until they're 16 or 17. They can get a driver's license, but we are always looking for ways to leapfrog that constraint.
What do you make of? I've recently really got into virtual reality in a big way. It was kind of always at the kind of the fringes of tech for me, and kind of, and I've really got involved with it, especially some of the stuff that Meta's doing at the moment. I think is really, really impressive, and really gives insights into where this is going to lead over the next few years. And one of the things I've been really impressed with is their Horizons Workplace app for their Quest, where you can all essentially, you can have a meeting where you sit in a room, and the functionality within it is just phenomenal. Do you see, now that the technology, or we pretty much have that technology, and it's just going to get better, do you see online school, especially in terms of Sora, moving into that kind of environment?
Of course, we'll always stay at the cutting edge. I usually shy away from these sort of conversations because I think they can distract from the main point, which is it's a pedagogical failure. It's a philosophical failure that's making schools bad today. You cannot throw virtual reality on top of a 2021 era Zoom school and think it's going to fix it, right? It's just not going to happen. The interdisciplinary students connecting their why with their content, understanding the relevance of it, having this relationship-led community, those are all the most important aspects, right? And then if we can throw on virtual reality, in fact, we will. This is why in a 10, 20-year time span, I have no doubt virtual school is going to be 10x better, or I should say the virtual classroom will be 10x better than a in-person classroom. Right now, I think it has parity, or is perhaps better because of the engagement tools we talked about earlier. But that's why I think it's really hard to bet against the internet, right? But yeah, again, it's philosophical, it's pedagogical failures that we have to overcome first.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. It's that if we want to take something as basic as the SAMR model of tech integration, just the substitution of what we already have with new tech is never great. And we saw that during COVID, didn't we? Schools turned their physical classroom with rows of desks essentially into a video call, and kids stopped turning up. Teachers got bored because it just didn't work. You're just trying to overlay a video call onto a traditional classroom just was never ever going to end well. And interestingly, and I think that's why it's been great to get into this so much with you this evening, is that a lot of teachers will just, and I think probably, even though COVID has done probably a really good job for what you're doing and really helped, in it, on the flip side of that coin, you're probably on an uphill battle with a lot of people now, because when you say we do a virtual school that's online, that 99% of teachers are going to think, oh my goodness, it's going to be like that nightmare during COVID when we were trying to speak to a student on a video call and their camera was turned off and we couldn't like, do you know what I mean? I think the whole pedagogical approach to online learning has to move with that. But I think the technology and some of the stuff that Mark Zuckerberg's talking about at the minute, in terms of some of the innovations they're putting into their headsets, where you can track eye movement, so you can actually make full eye contact. So at the moment, I think it uses machine learning to guess where you might be looking, but actually the new headsets that are being released actually tracks your eye movement, so you know that when you're looking at someone within virtual reality, you actually make an eye contact. And I think something as simple as that, as human as that, can help what you're saying there about the interaction, the community elements.
Absolutely. Yeah. 10, 20 years, there would be no reason to go to a physical classroom in terms of efficacy of the learning environment. But right now, we can still solve those core philosophical pillars and really leapfrog over schools, no matter what the medium is. And I will agree, COVID made the remote aspect of our school probably 5 times harder to sell, but it also made people 5 times more willing to talk about the need for something new and different, right? So I think it balances out.
Yeah, definitely. We had the futurist Gerd Leonhardt on the podcast a few months ago, and he talked about that the next big company, the next Google, he said, would be an education provider, and I think we're really starting to see a push in that direction, and innovative companies and schools like Sora, and the work that you're doing, Garrett, is really transforming in ways that are unimaginable. Really, we have these types of conversations week in, week out. But when you mentioned like the way you're using your data, for example, I know it kind of just blew our minds a bit there. So I think there's the innovation that's happening is phenomenal, and it's only going to get better. And I think we're going to live in an exciting world where education is important. I think it's good. Hopefully, it's going to reignite that fire in our learners, where maybe sometimes it's not there anymore. It's not, and being people who've worked in schools, half the battle is trying to get kids interested in education, get kids interested in learning, and I certainly welcome a present or a future where that is the case. So Garrett, thank you for, I know you're visiting family in Texas there, so we really appreciate the time that you've taken out for us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your time down there.
Thank you. It was wonderful to meet you all.
Thanks, Garrett.
Cheers, Garrett.
Take care, mate. Bye bye.